After 11 years of fertility clinics and negative tests, my husband ripped the IV port out of my own arm in the recovery room and told me my sister-in-law was already 4 months along with his baby, and that I had until the Snovamel to get out of the house I'd paid half of. The machines were still beeping when he said it. I'd just come out of my 4th and final round of IVF at the clinic on Bay Street. The sedation still thick in my blood, and the first thing I saw when I opened my eyes wasn't a nurse. It was him, standing at the foot of the bed in his camel coat, checking his phone like he was waiting for a meeting to start. "Don't bother with the 5th round," he said. "Save the money, Priya's having a boy." I genuinely thought I was hallucinating from the anesthesia. I want you to know that before anything else happens in this story, so you understand how far down I had to climb back from. My name doesn't matter as much as what he did. So for now, just know I was 36, a high school chemistry teacher in Barrie, and I had spent 11 years married to a man named Derek, who ran a small but profitable HVAC company his father built, and somewhere in those 11 years I had stopped being his wife and become a project he'd given up on. If you're listening from anywhere in Ontario right now, drop it in the comments, because I think you'll understand the particular flavor of this kind of winter. Derek didn't even drive me home from the clinic. My friend Carla did, and she didn't say anything the whole way, just kept glancing over at me at red lights like she expected me to shatter. I didn't shatter. Not yet. I sat in her passenger seat with a cotton ball taped in the crook of my elbow, and I felt strangely calm, the way you feel calm right before your body understands something your mind already knows. By the time I got home, that calm had curdled into something sharper. Derek's mother, Eleanor, was already in my kitchen. She had a key. She'd had a key for 9 years ever since the wedding, and I had never once thought to ask for it back because why would you? She was family, she'd hemmed my dress, she'd cried at my vows. Now she was standing at my island with a stack of cardboard boxes from the liquor store, taping them together like she was setting up an assembly line. "You'll want to take your things from upstairs first," she said, not even looking up. "Derek thinks it's best if you're settled somewhere before Priya starts showing properly. For the optics. For the optics. 11 years and I was a problem of optics." I stood in my own front hall in my coat, my purse still on my shoulder, and I asked her where Derek was, and she said he was at the shop, that he'd be by later to make sure things were handled fairly. And I remember laughing, an ugly short bark of a laugh, because handled fairly was rich coming from a family that had decided my fate while I was still under sedation. I went upstairs anyway. I packed what I could carry in 2 suitcases because some childish part of me refused to use Eleanor's liquor boxes. I took my late mother's wedding band, which I kept in a small velvet pouch in my sock drawer, the one thing of hers I had left since she passed when I was 22, and I took my laptop and my marking binders, because report cards were due in 3 weeks, and grief does not excuse you from grading chemistry tests. Everything else, 11 years of everything else, I left. Derek had already moved money. I found that out 2 days later, sitting in my car in the parking lot of my own bank on Bayfield Street, when the teller told me gently that the joint account had a balance of $14 and change. He'd cleaned it out the morning after the clinic, transferred it into an account I'd never seen, and when I called him, voice shaking so hard I had to grip the steering wheel, he said, "You'll get the house and the divorce eventually, Maya, don't be dramatic." And that was the first time in this whole nightmare that I heard my own name out loud, and it sounded like an accusation. I am going to be honest with you about the next part, because I think honesty is the only thing I have left from that winter. I did not have a plan. I had a Hyundai with half a tank of gas, 2 suitcases, and a school district direct deposit that wouldn't come in for another 9 days. I drove out past Aurelia because Carla had a cousin renting out a converted bunkie on a lake property, cheap, off-season, no insulation to speak of but a working space heater, and I took it sight unseen for $400 a month, money I did not currently have, on the promise of next month's paycheck. The bunkie smelled like cedar and mouse droppings. There was a single bed, a hot plate, and a window that looked out over a frozen lake so flat and white it looked like it had been erased. The first week I cried more than I taught. My students probably knew something was wrong. I kept losing my place mid-sentence explaining molarity, staring at the whiteboard like the numbers had rearranged themselves. I lost 11 pounds in 3 weeks without trying. I stopped checking my phone for the first few days because every notification was either Eleanor asking when I'd be by to sort the rest of my things, or Derek's lawyer, a polished woman named Bethany Cho, sending me documents I didn't have the money to have reviewed. It was the second week in the dead cold of late January when I met him. I'd gone out to the woodpile behind the bunkie at maybe 9 at night, because the space heater had tripped the breaker again and I was desperate, and I slipped on black ice and went down hard on my hip, hard enough that I cried out before I could stop myself, the kind of cry that just rips out of you. A porch light came on at the next property over, maybe 60 meters through the trees, and a man came out in just a flannel shirt, no jacket, like the cold didn't register to him, and crossed the frozen yard fast. "You hurt?" he said, crouching beside me. He didn't touch me first, just asked, which I noticed even through the pain because 11 years of Derek had trained me to expect men to handle me like furniture. "My hip. I think it's just bruised." I was mortified, lying in the snow in my pajama pants and my dead mother's wedding band on a string around my neck because I didn't trust leaving it in the bunkie. He helped me up slow, an arm under mine, and once I was steady he stepped back immediately, like he didn't want to crowd me. He introduced himself simply, said he lived next door, said he'd noticed the lights on at odd hours and figured someone new had taken the Hendersons' bunkie. He was maybe 40, quiet-voiced, a beard going gray at the edges he clearly didn't bother trimming, wearing flannel like it was a uniform and not a costume. He fixed my breaker that night, standing in my freezing closet of an electrical panel with a headlamp, not saying much, and when I tried to pay him, he just shook his head and said, "Keep your money for groceries," which made something in my chest crack open in a way I didn't have language for yet. I want to tell you, I knew right away there was more to him, but I didn't. For weeks I just thought he was a quiet man who fixed things and didn't ask questions, which after Derek's family felt like a vacation. I'd later learn the locals called him the sheriff, half-jokingly, because he'd spent almost 2 decades as an OPP officer before he walked away from it, and some habit of watching over the road never left him. He plowed the shared laneway without being asked. He checked on the elderly couple 2 properties down every storm. His name was Wes. He was the kind of lonely that doesn't announce itself, the kind you only notice once you're close enough to see he ate dinner standing up at the counter most nights, because there was no one to sit across from. We didn't fall into anything fast. I want to be clear about that for anyone listening who's been burned the way I was, because fast was never going to work on me again. It started with him leaving a bag of firewood on my step. It started with me bringing over a container of soup because I'd made too much and it felt strange to waste it. It started with 2 broken people sitting 6 feet apart on his porch in February, watching the lake, not talking much, and somehow that silence did more for me than 11 years of Derek's noise ever had. Meanwhile, the divorce ground forward like a glacier. Bethany Cho sent letter after letter. Derek wanted the house appraised and sold, wanted a clean break, wanted, infuriatingly, for me to sign a clause acknowledging I'd contributed minimally to the marital assets, as if my teacher's salary hadn't covered the mortgage for 3 straight years when his business nearly folded in 2019. I couldn't afford a real lawyer, not on a teacher's salary with rent on a bunkie and credit card debt climbing from the IVF rounds. Derek had insisted we pay out of pocket because the benefits through his company were too complicated to file. Carla found me a legal aid clinic in Barrie. A tired but sharp young lawyer named Imani, who took one look at my bank statements and said flatly, "He moved money the day after a medical procedure. That's going to matter." It mattered. It took until April, the ice on the lake finally cracking and groaning at night like the world itself was thawing out of something, before Imani got the financial disclosure that showed Derek had been quietly funneling company profits into a numbered account for almost 2 years. Well before Priya was ever in the picture, sheltering income so the business would appear smaller than it was during any divorce settlement. Imani's exact words to me on the phone were, "He built himself an exit strategy a long time before he told you about it." And I remember sitting on Wes's porch steps when I got that call, and Wes just quietly bringing me a blanket and going back inside to give me privacy, which is its own kind of love, knowing when not to ask. By May, I'd missed my period for the 2nd month running and assumed it was stress, the kind of cruel joke my body had played on me for 11 years with Derek, always promising and never delivering. Wes drove me to the Shoppers Drug Mart in town himself, didn't say a word the whole drive, just held my hand once at a red light. I took the test in the gas station bathroom because I couldn't wait the 20 minutes back to the bunkie. 2 lines. Then, 3 weeks later at a real clinic, the ultrasound tech went quiet in that particular way that makes your stomach drop, and then turned the screen toward me and said, "There are 2 heartbeats. Twins." After 11 years and 4 rounds of IVF with Derek that ended in nothing, after he'd told me to save my money, after Priya's pregnancy had been thrown at me like a verdict on my own worth as a woman, I was carrying twins, conceived without a single needle, without a single clinic appointment, with a man who'd never once made me feel like a project. I have to tell you what happened when Derek found out, because I think about it more than I should, more than is probably healthy. Eleanor heard it first through the small-town grapevine that exists no matter how rural you go, and she actually called me, her voice doing this brittle, trembling thing. "Is it true?" she asked, and I said yes, and she went silent for a long moment before she said, "He's going to lose his mind," and hung up. Derek called 4 times that night. I let it go to voicemail every time. The 4th message, I'll never forget it, his voice cracking in a way I hadn't heard since his father's funeral. How is this possible? We tried everything. As if my body had been broken specifically to spite him, and was now somehow an even bigger insult for working perfectly for someone else. The divorce finalized that September, the financial disclosure landing like a hammer once Imani filed it formally. Derek's company, it turned out, was worth nearly double what he'd reported, and under Ontario's equalization rules, hiding marital assets doesn't just get corrected, it gets penalized. The judge ordered him to cover my legal costs, and awarded me a significantly larger share than he'd ever planned to part with. Enough that for the first time in 11 years, I wasn't doing math in my head every time I bought groceries. I used some of it to finally, properly furnish the bunkie, which by then Wes and I had quietly, unofficially turned into one shared home between 2 properties, tearing down the old fence between our lots that November with our own hands, both of us 6 months pregnant adjacent in my case and stubborn in his, laughing more than the work probably warranted. Priya, it turned out, wasn't even Derek's first detour. 2 months after his and my divorce finalized, his own father let it slip at a family gathering Eleanor still insisted on hosting that Derek had been seeing someone on and off for almost 3 years before Priya, going back to right around the time we started our 2nd round of IVF, which meant somewhere in there. While I was injecting myself in our bathroom, believing it was just the 2 of us against impossible odds, it had never really been the 2 of us at all. Eleanor stopped calling after that. I think some part of her finally understood what she'd helped pack into liquor boxes. The twins came in late January, a boy and a girl, born during a snowstorm so fierce the hospital in Aurelia nearly diverted us, Wes driving 40 minutes on roads that should have been impassable with the same calm, watchful focus I'd first seen the night he found me on the ice. He held my hand through 14 hours of labor and didn't flinch once, not even when I told him things in active labor that I will not repeat here. We named our daughter after my mother. I held both of them in that hospital room, exhausted and stitched and more whole than I had felt in over a decade, and I looked out the window at the storm finally easing into soft, ordinary snow, and I thought about the woman who'd been wheeled out of a fertility clinic 11 months earlier with an empty bank account and a husband who couldn't be bothered to drive her home, and I felt, for the first time in longer than I could remember, no need to hate her, only to thank her for surviving long enough to get here.